InvestorIdeas.com podcast.
Good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of InvestorIdeas.com Podcasts. Today's podcast is sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corporation, trading on the OTC as CSUI, a fully licensed cannabis and cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. In today's podcast, going to be looking at a few public and private company announcements, looking at CannTab Therapeutics Limited, trading on the CSE as PIL and the OTCQB as CTABF. Also looking at BevCanna Enterprises Incorporated, trading on the CSE as BEV and the OTCQB as BVNNF. And Neptune Wellness Solutions Incorporated, trading on the NASDAQ and the TSX as NEPT, as well as Genome British Columbia. So first today, starting with CannTab Therapeutics Limited, who announced the impending launch of its suite of hard-to-pill cannabinoid formulations in Australia with its partner Can Global Limited, trading on the ASX as CGB. Now, Can Global, through its managed partnership with Medcan Australia, received an import permit and have placed an initial order for CannTab's products. And CannTab will immediately apply for an export permit with Health Canada, which will allow it to fulfill this purchase order. The company intends to ship its suite of patented and patent-pending products, including THC, CBD, and THC and CBD combination hard pill formulations, to Can Global before the end of 2020. Once the products are shipped to Can Global in Australia, the products will be distributed throughout Australia's medical distributors, including doctors, pharmacies, and hospitals. Now, Applied Cannabis Research, or ACR, a leading Australian contract research organization focused exclusively on medical cannabis treatments, has launched Australia's largest observational study ever undertaken for medical cannabis. Now, CannTab, through the products it supplies to Can Global Limited, which is a direct participant in this study, will be participating in this clinical collaboration with major Australian clinics and hospitals to complete the Cannabinoid Medicine Observational Study, or the CMOS, that will collect data from 20,000 patients nationwide over 5 years. Now, the CMOS aims to assess the safety and efficacy of medical cannabis products from a range of refractory conditions, including fibromyalgia, chronic pain syndromes, PTSD, epilepsy, and other mental health and neurological conditions, using cannabis, including CannTab's hard pill cannabinoid formulations. Now, ACR will lead the study in conjunction with Australia's medical community and key industry partners such as Althea Group Holdings, Kronos Australia, Cymer Life Sciences, Medcan Australia, and Can Global. This deal is 2 years in the making and represents important milestones for our company, explains Larry Latowski, the Chief Executive Officer of CannTab. Mr. Latowski continued, "It's the first of what will be many international alliances and agreements to export our patented products for distribution through our partners' networks, and it is the first observational clinical study that we are confident will support our vision of our product as unique, effective, and a preferred cannabinoid delivery system for many medical symptoms and conditions." Now, Shulon Feldman, Can Global's managing director, says, "We're very excited to progress the launch of CannTab's innovative cannabis-based tablets in Australia, which we expect will be very sought after by doctors who are looking to prescribe pharmaceutical-grade medical cannabis products to their patients. It's our understanding from discussions with medical professionals that this is easier for them to prescribe a uniform dosage tablet produced to pharmaceutical-grade standards compared to unreliability of delivery methods used by other products available already on the market, giving our product a solid competitive advantage." Now, the legal cannabis market is expected to be worth $1.55 billion by 2024 in Australia, New Zealand, and the surrounding islands, with medical cannabis accounting for approximately 40% of the market. And Australia is expected to count for 79% of the region's overall market by 2024 due to the comparably large population and higher household disposable income than New Zealand and the other islands across the region. So I've talked a little bit about the Australian cannabis market in the past, obviously still just focusing on the medical side of things. Right now there still is, it's much further behind, I guess, than I think most Australians would prefer, and even most of the companies participating in that market would prefer. But I do think that this Applied Cannabis Research organization going through this CMOS is going to be definitely a step in the right direction, similarly to what we saw with the Shoppers Drug Mart program in Canada. Again, for doctors, practitioners, and pharmacists to really have an understanding of the cannabis drugs that they're going to be prescribing and offering to patients for different medical ailments, they do need to have data, and they do need to have access to data on the products they're actually going to be selling. This is the difficulty with the cannabis space in general, is most of the data that's out there is anecdotal. And as much as there is a rough understanding of The overall effects that you can assume from most of these cannabinoid products that are out on the market, there isn't a guarantee of certain efficacy ratings, and as well, there isn't consistency. And the difference between one company's product and another company's product is a huge difference because of the different patent pending technology that they're using, different delivery methods, bioavailability, and a variety of other methods, as well as the actual quality of the cannabis that they've grown, where it was grown, how it was grown, how it was extracted, and how it was put into whatever product they're going to be using. So I do think that similarly to what we saw in Canada, where the medical program seemed non-existent when recreational market came online 2 years ago, now you're seeing that the medical program by shoppers is actually quite resilient and quite robust. There's a lot of easy access points for patients. There's a lot of understanding and data now available to pharmacists, to medical practitioners, and there's a better understanding of which products can be prescribed for which ailments. The same thing is probably going to play out in Australia over a 5-year term. I think within the first year or two, they'll have a little bit more of an understanding, and you'll start to see that market build out as we saw in Canada. But I do think that this is also another thing that's been in line with what I've been talking about, which is the real start of the international cannabis industry. Again, this industry is still very segmented. You have lots of companies within the states that are still relegated to a single state. And even multi-state operators, it's very difficult for them to have any sort of international footprint outside of the US. Same thing with Canadian producers. Many of them are still only focused on the Canadian market. They are still extending themselves into the European market, but you haven't really seen this go fully global yet. And now we're actually starting to see that. So Australia going to be having more importing and exporting of products. Same thing you're going to see with the European Union, depending on which countries you're looking at. I've talked a lot about how Latin American countries, specifically Colombia, is becoming a huge player in the international export market. Israel also coming online. There's parts of Africa as well that there's starting to be new developments and new producers. And really, I do see this going global within the next 2 years. You're going to see a lot more focus on importing and exporting, and this is going to start really changing the dynamics of cost as well as preferred product formulations. I think that what we're starting to see on more the international scale outside of North America is a focus on pharmaceutical grade products. Again, pill formats, non-smokable formats is really what you're starting to see a big demand for. And this does sort of go with, again, the general global perception of cannabis and use of cannabis outside of North America. Again, in Europe, there isn't this huge stigma attached to it, but there also isn't the massive culture behind it that we have in Canada or the US. That sort of has been the big advocate towards cannabis expansion. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I would definitely pay attention to this medical program through the CMOS in Australia over the next couple of years. Like I said, I do think it's going to play out very similarly to shoppers, and I think that type of model is what we're going to see play out on a global scale for medical cannabis, is again focusing on having guaranteed delivery systems, guaranteed bioavailability, consistency of products, non-combustible formats, and again, sort of next generation products. Moving on now to BevCanna Enterprises, who announced that successfully completed the R&D and trial production runs of its exclusively licensed award-winning line of Keef beverages and the white label beverages the company is producing for State B beverages. Now, BevCanna produced and evaluated multiple formulations on the Keef and State B products, including sparkling water, tea-based, and soda formats, and multiple bottling formats, including PET and aluminum. Tests were conducted for research and development, shelf stability testing, and equipment commissioning purposes in preparation for the receipt of their standard processing license and subsequent product commercialization by first quarter of 2021. Now, BevCanna is currently in the late-stage discussions to partner with a leading Canadian licensed producer to distribute its products to provincial cannabis distribution boards through the LP's Health Canada issue sales license. And this will allow BevCanna to begin distribution of its white label client products, Keef and Cali Boom blended products, and its own branded products across Canada in the first quarter of 2021, bridging the gap until the company receives its own sales license expected in 2021. The inaugural production runs of Keef and State B were extremely successful, and we're now moving full steam ahead with our product testing and quality assurance programs, said John Campbell. We're particularly excited to take the next step with our own branded and exclusively licensed product commercialization efforts in tandem with our white label partners, and we will be fully prepared to move ahead with production once we have received our standard processing license. Now, BevCanna's state-of-the-art facility currently is capable of formulating, processing, and packaging a range of beverage product formats, including carbonated and non-carbonated aluminum canned and PET beverages. And the new beverages will be offered in a variety of sizes, ranging from 60 milliliters to 1 liter in both standard form and custom vessels. Only reason I really bring up this announcement is, again, the beverage industry still has not really realized its potential. And again, this really just comes down to the unfortunate state of regulations that surrounds beverages in Canada at the moment, the difficulty with having product stability and consistency, and as well the sort of overall difficulties of getting these products to market. BevCanna, probably one of the biggest expectation companies within this space. There's a few others that have been, again, highly anticipated for quite some time now. But doesn't look like, again, their beverages are going to be hitting market till 2021. It does seem that based on the pace that a lot of these companies are going to be getting their products to market, based on the regulation sort of staleness that we're seeing, and the overall sort of process of getting any of these products out there, you're probably not going to see this beverage market really take off till probably late 2021. Obviously, COVID has slowed down some of this to some extent, but really the biggest issue is, again, the actual R&D factor, the fact that BevCanna still does not have products on the market, that they're still going to be working with a licensed producer to get their sales license, that again, they won't have their license until 2021. Not the worst situation to be in, but again, this is going to be the overall difficulty for any of these companies that are going to be launching beverages later in the year, or ones that still have sort of expectancy around their products, is that unfortunately there are still beverages on the market today. They're not amazing, but the fact is they're on shelves. People are starting to build up brand awareness and understanding of those beverages. And the other unfortunate thing is that maybe some of the beverages that are out there are not the highest quality, which does build a bad expectation for consumers around those beverages. And it's something we're starting to see in the Canadian market right now. In the US, the beverage industry is much more extensive, and you're seeing a lot more variation of products, styles, formats, dosage levels. Whereas in Canada, you're not seeing a huge range of formats still. You're not seeing a huge range of flavor options. Obviously, the dosage is limited. So I do think that the overall perception of these cannabis beverages is not looking too great right now, and it's probably not going to change for another year or so until you actually see some regulation changes regarding dosage. That has to change at some point, as well as, again, once you start seeing more SKUs available, different flavorings, different product formats, different sizes. Right now, again, there's really only a couple of key players in the market. The THC Kiss Shot, Canopy Growth beverages have done really well. T-God's beverages are actually doing quite well as well, and it's because there's only a few products out on the market so far. So I do think that overall the beverage industry isn't going to quite turn out the way everyone was anticipating till maybe another year or two from now. But hopefully some of these products and companies can get their products out to the market a little bit faster so people have a better understanding of the potential of these products in the future. Next, looking at Neptune Wellness Solutions, who announced entering into a supply agreement with the Ontario Cannabis Stores, wholesaler and sole online retailer of recreational cannabis, for the sale and distribution of Neptune's new proprietary recreational product line, Mood Ring. Now, this is the second such agreement Neptune has secured through its wholly owned subsidiary, and the company has announced it's entered into agreement with the British Columbia Liquor Distribution Branch, the wholesaler and public retailer of non-medical cannabis products throughout that province. This is yet another landmark moment in the cannabis movement and will allow Neptune to bring Mood Ring brand affordable, sustainable, and premium cannabis products to the millions of people who live in that province, said Michael Camarata, the Chief Executive Officer and President of Neptune. Now, Ontario is Canada's largest market for adult-use cannabis products, and the agreement authorizes Neptune to supply Mood Ring products to the OCS for sale and wholesale distribution, and the products are anticipated to be available for purchase this fall through the OCS online store. Now, additionally, the Mood Ring product line will be available in the 211 licensed private retailers in Ontario. Together with BC, this extends Neptune's reach to 515 retailers in Canada. And the initial Mood Ring product rollout will initially include the high CBD oil, high CBD capsules, classic hashish, legacy hashish. Mood Ring uses Neptune's proprietary cold ethanol extraction process technology to create full spectrum extracts from the company's CBD products and newly implemented solventless extraction for THC concentrates. So Neptune Wellness Solutions, talked about them a lot during COVID. They've been really smart with building out sanitization and different PPE products. And now focusing on a very underserved segment of the Canadian market right now, which is the CBD market. If you've been paying attention to what sort of products are hitting shelves, especially in Ontario and BC, the two most populous provinces in Canada, you still see that there's a real shortage of CBD products. And this really comes down to the regulations in Canada versus the US. Again, in the US, CBD and cannabis, or THC cannabis, are treated as completely two separate entities, whereas in Canada, CBD falls under basic cannabis regulations. The difficulty with that is a lot of these companies have almost ignored CBD products in general, and they've focused heavily on high THC products. That's what you see almost entirely in most recreational stores. And what you're hearing and seeing from consumers on a consistent basis is a demand for high dosage CBD products. There still is nothing really on the market in Canada, which forces a lot of these consumers to go to online stores and buy from the US. And again, there's difficulties with that whole purchase deal anyways. But I do think that Neptune has really thought this out quite well in the launch of their products, which products they're going to be focusing on, which provinces they're launching in first. A lot of those decisions seem to be quite well thought out, and I do think that they're going to at least have some pretty heavy sales for all of their CBD products, as again, it's an underserved segment of this market right now. So hopefully they'll continue along that path, and hopefully we will start to see more companies follow suit with having better consistent and different formats of CBD products, as again, within Canada, this is still one of the most underserved segments, as there's tons of product with really high THC that's sitting on shelves, whereas there's not as much CBD products available. Lastly today, looking at Genome, British Columbia, for a little bit of BC pride for my local province, who congratulated two BC-led teams for their projects designed to harness the power and potential of bio-innovation to create healthier, more sustainable, and prosperous communities. Now, the two projects, jointly valued at $10 million, bring together the best of Canadian applied sciences and commercialization. The first project, the Clean Plant Extraction Sequencing Diagnosis, or CLEANSED, for clean grapevines in Canada, is being led by Siddhasarna Pujari from Brock University, and their end user counterparts are Mike Rott from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Bill Schneck from the Canadian Grape Certification Network. Now, the team is working to develop a rapid, cost-effective genomic solution to replace the over 30 molecular and biological tests currently performed on grapevines to look for disease. Now, this one genomic test would speed up the release of virus-free, valuable grapevine material from about 3 years to about 1 year or less, providing rapid access to valuable new materials. And the Canadian Grapevine Certification Network will use this genomic testing to monitor domestically bred vines, ensuring grape growers have faster and more affordable access to clean vines to improve the health of their vineyards. And the second project, the fast-track breeding and powdery mildew-resistant cannabis, is being led by Lauren Reisenberg and Marco Tedesco from the University of BC with industry partner Greg Bott from Aurora Cannabis. And this work will address a need to identify the desirable breeding traits, including resistancy to powdery mildew infection, that current cannabis cultivators don't have. Genomic resources will be created that will allow the project team to characterize sources of genetic resistance to powdery mildew and to begin to introduce them into Aurora's cannabis breeding program. It's an honor to invest in this work, and we congratulate all of our successful teams, said Dr. Pascal Smothier, the president and CEO of Genome BC. We are realizing the power of the genomic science in both these BC-led projects. For the grapevine industry, there is a huge unmet need for rapid disease testing, and the cannabis industry, we are supporting the important science behind this growing industry. Now, improved cannabis cultivars will result in reduced losses of pathogen contamination and increased product quality, and the breeding pipeline itself will also be used in the future to identify other important production and high valuable traits and to create new cannabis cultivars with superior agronomic performance. And these projects were part of the announcement made yesterday by William Amos, the Parliamentary Secretary of Science, on behalf of the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, Navdeep Bains. And they announced that $16 million in federal support to 10 new genomic research products funded through Genome Canada, and provincial governments, businesses, and research partners are also investing nearly $14 million in co-funding for a total investment of $56.4 million in the areas of health, agriculture, and the environment. So, obviously, a couple of things there that I find really interesting is the consistent sort of connection between viticulture and the cannabis industry. Again, these are two industries that deal with a lot of the similar problems, deal with a lot of similar terroir, and also, again, are highly favorable in the same type of areas. So obviously BC is a great wine region and is also a great area for growing cannabis, similarly with California, similarly with other parts of the world, even in Colombia. So again, you see a lot of the similar sort of molds and problems arising in these similar terroir areas. I do think it's also interesting that they're going to be focusing and working with Aurora to have mildew resistant or mildew infectious cannabis plants that can, again, resist this powdery mildew, and also to see how that translates over to the rest of the industry. I do think that in general, this is something that the cannabis industry has been heavily focused on and is still having a difficulty in getting around, which is pest control and general health of the cannabis plants while maintaining a natural way of growing your plants and not having to use pesticides or any sort of particulates that would get into the end product. Still is a big factor that's affecting this industry. There's lots of different methods. There's lots of different bioorganic pesticides that have been produced in the market, and there are a lot of different genetic tests going on to, again, try to weed out some of these weak plant cultivars or find more resistant cultivars. So I do think that that's going to be an interesting research project to pay attention to. Definitely would pay attention to how this affects Aurora over the next coming months and into next year, and to see how this affects harvesting and the cannabis industry in Canada in general. But definitely was a nice little feather in the cap for BC. That's all for today's podcast. And once again, today's podcast was sponsored by Cannabis Swiss Corporation, trading on the OTC as CSUI, a fully licensed cannabis cultivation and distribution company in Switzerland for recreational tobacco products and medical CBD oils. That's all for today's podcast. Podcast is now a certified word trademark on the blockchain through Cognate Incorporated CM certification. InvestorIdeas.com podcasts are also available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and TuneIn. If you'd like to be a guest or sponsor of this podcast, please contact InvestorIdeas.com. Investor Ideas reminds all listeners to read our disclaimers and disclosures on the InvestorIdeas.com website, and this podcast is not an endorsement to buy products or services or securities. Investors are reminded that all investments involve risk and possible loss of investment. Investor Ideas does not condone the use of cannabis except where permissible by law. Our site does not possess, distribute, or sell cannabis products.